This is the final part of the presentation I've been giving showing how the first two pages of the sonnets are encrypted. You'll remember the most important thing really is the key, which is telling you 3 times 3. Everything must happen in threes. And if you've been watching attentively to the previous part, you'll feel a little bit shortchanged because I haven't been following the key, or I have been following the key, but TTT, clavis the key to the treasury, key to the treasures, has to come in threes. So nothing really can be validated until the key has been turned 3 times, and then we can open the door. And of course, as you know, I've shown you one encryption that was on the sonnet's title page there, where I showed you the hidden geometry and how it led to the exact spot where Edward de Vere lies buried, and it told us twice on there that Edward de Vere was the author of those sonnets. I also showed you another encryption on the second page where we laid out that text into a grid of 19 letters across, and we saw that Edward de Vere was buried in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. So between those two we found the exact spot and place where he was buried, but that was only 2 encryptions, and we need to see a third. Everything has to come in threes. So now I'm going to show you the third encryption, and first of all a little bit of background to what it's about. To the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, Mr. W.H., that's how the mystical dedication begins. Mr. W.H., quite a lot of arguments about who that is. Clearly from this sentence, if it can be understood at all, the only begetter and Mr. W.H. are one and the same person. If you read the first 18 sonnets, it's pretty obvious that there's only one person who does any begetting in the sonnets, and he's generally known as the fair youth. He's not named in the sonnets, but he's the person who the poet addresses, and the poet writes 17 sonnets on the trot saying, have a baby for love of me, and the 18th sonnet seems to imply that he's had a baby. And so he's the fair youth, and most scholars will agree that the fair youth is Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton, who was quite a pretty boy of 19 when these, also around that age, when these sonnets were addressed to him. We now know that the poet, Shakespeare, is Edward de Vere. That's, I think, been proved by the stuff I've shown you on the previous encryptions. So the first 17 sonnets, Edward de Vere writes to Henry Wriothesley saying, have a baby, have a baby, have a baby 17 times. They're known as the procreation sonnets, 17 times going over and over and over the same argument, really. He says to the fair youth, who is a narcissist. How do you get a narcissist to do anything? You tell them you'll take their beauty away if they don't do it, and they jolly well snap too. So Shakespeare says 17 times, your beauty will die if you don't procreate, if you don't have a son. And among the arguments he uses, he says, your summer will be cut short by ragged winter if you don't have this baby. The winter-summer idea is given a number of times actually in the first 17 sonnets, and he also says if you do go the length of having a son for the love of me, that would be nice, and you will grow and live in it and in my rhyme. So that's the theme of the first 17 sonnets, and then we get to sonnet 18, and in sonnet 18 Edward de Vere says to him, thy eternal summer shall not fade. Well, we've just been told that his summer will be cut short by ragged winter if he doesn't have a baby, so now we're being told his summer shall not fade. It rather implies that the baby has been born. The scheme has worked. Honey-tongued Shakespeare has managed to persuade this narcissistic fair youth to do his bidding. We also learn in sonnet 18, in eternal lines to time thou growest. Well, we were told that if he had a baby, he will grow and live in it and in my rhyme. And now that seems to be what's going to happen. In eternal lines to time thou growest. So a number of Oxfordian scholars are working on finding a lot of interesting stuff to show that the ensuing son was no known son of Henry Wriothesley. He didn't actually marry till some time later anyway. So who could the son be? And it's being suggested that he was Henry, the 18th Earl of Oxford, Henry Vere. So we have a situation in which the 17th Earl of Oxford is persuading the Earl of Southampton to beget a son for love of him that he can then, if you like, adopt or secretly claim to be his own son and bring him up as a Vere and allow him to inherit all his titles and ultimately become the 18th Earl of Oxford. And certainly that would explain the symbolism between having the first 17 sonnets saying hurry up and have a baby and the 18th saying you've done it, because the future 18th Earl of Oxford has been born. Now, there are a huge number of arguments and a lot of evidence to show that this is the case, and the email address you've got there is a YouTube channel, and there you can see a speech in which I give a very large amount of evidence to show that Henry Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford, who you see on the left there, is the natural son of Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, who's on the right. And it looks, from this very strange picture, as though the artist kind of knew this. I can't see any other excuse for having, and there is no other picture like it, where you have two earls quite so closely seated and looking quite so similar. So that is some of the background to the encryption I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so you remember this. We've been here before. It's the 19th equal letter spacing grid of the dedication to the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, etc., etc., etc. You will remember the fourth T has De Vere written in it. It's a rebus. These sonnets all by Ever the fourth T, and you'll remember that I made that into a capital I and we saw Edward de Vere lies here. And then we went off to the left and we found another rebus, which was an upside down cross, showing that he was buried in the South Cross aisle of St. Peter's Church. And then we went even further left and we found another rebus, a pictogram of Westminster Abbey, and that was telling us really that he was buried in what we now call Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. If you were concentrating, which I'm sure you were, you'll have noted that I didn't seem to show anything to the right-hand side of this grid. Nothing really showed up from column 10 to column 19, and that's what we're going to look at now, and that's where the third and final encryption is hidden. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is take away this capital I, but keep a symbol of Christ. How do I do that? Well, there's one very obvious way. I'm going to turn it into a big cross like that. That's the 4T cross, or the cross potent, and you can see De Vere is the fourth T at the bottom of it. In there we have a perfect anagram of Heed Vere's paternity lie. Now, I can see you might be saying, hang on, you can probably get lots of anagrams out of that, and why do you pick that particularly? Well, in defence, I will say that we know that we're talking about Vere. Vere's obviously the subject of all that seems to be going on here. The word Vere's is all in the vertical stem of that cross. The word paternity, the letters are all to be found in the horizontal stem of that cross. Lie is not even an anagram, it's just sitting there to plain sight. So in fact, it's only the word heed that I've had to do a bit of special pleading for and had to pick out. But I would argue that that falls very much into the way that these things are presented. If you remember the Stratford Monument, we have "Stay, passenger, why goest thou by so fast?" or "Read if thou canst, whom envious death hath placed within his monument." This imperative voice, which seems to be coming out from these encryptions, it's very much in line with that. Heed Vere's paternity lie. So it's kind of asking you to see if you can find out about a lie, paternity lie. Now we're going to step one step now to the right, and I'm going to show you a phallic symbol right there. A phallic symbol, very well-known phallic symbol, and very, very ancient one at that. Goes right back to Egyptian times. Looks like an upside-down T with an elongated stem, a symbol of male generative power. Now, what justification? No, actually, first of all, I'm going to say what is the message inside it, because that will give you a bit more confidence that what I'm doing is not complete Freudian fantasy. There's a perfect anagram in there of Vere's line. Now again, it's healthy to be sceptical, and be sceptical by all means, but we have to admit that a phallic symbol and a line are in some way connected, a symbol of male generative power. We also have to admit that if you look at the symbol next to it, the big cross, that if there's a lie in Vere's paternity, in the Vere family is a paternity lie, then clearly that would affect Vere's line. So we have a coincidence of theme between those two things. We also need to look for the Jesus Christ endorsements. If we look at the bottom, how it seems to be two sets of triple towers, clavis ad thesaurem there. So that's twice Jesus seems to be saying, yup, this is acceptable. And look at the column number. The column number is always important, and ask oneself, what the heck does the number 14 have to do with Jesus, male lines, etc.? Well, again, we go to the Bible, to the book of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 17. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. And from David until they were carried away into Babylon, that's to Josiah, 14 generations. And after they were carried away into Babylon unto Christ, 14 generations. So we see that Christ's male line is being counted in groups of 14 generations. We go to the preceding verse, verse 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was thus, when as his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Interesting this, because why do we have the great history of Jesus' male line being counted out in 14 generations to be followed immediately by something saying, well, Jesus wasn't even descended from this line because Mary was pregnant before she got together with Joseph. Remember the story, Joseph was rather upset about that and thought about casting her out, but was told by an angel not to do so. This is extremely interesting because take note of the verse numbers here. Verse 17 and verse 18. What has this got to do with the Veres? I mean, Edward de Vere was the 17th Earl of Oxford. And we are smelling a problem here that the 18th Earl of Oxford was not a descendant of the 17th ancient line that goes right back to the 10th century, that he is actually the natural child of someone else, Henry Wriothesley. 17 and 18 there are acting as a big clue and telling us the story. There's some parallel here between the Vere line and Christ's line. Now, some will be aware that 10 or 15 years ago, a very clever man called John Rollitt discovered the name of Henry Wriothesley encoded on the 18th grid. So he saw it quite easily because it was in vertical lines, and it comes in two blocks, Eoth Esley, and the WR at the beginning of the line was rather separated, and he wondered why. He wondered whether it was part of something bigger. Well, it is, and that's what I'm about to show you. There's Eoth Esley in two chunks, but side by side. So half the name is there, and where's the front end? Where's the WR? John Rollitt said that it belonged to the first W of well-wisher and to the first R of adventurer. So there it is. Interesting, because we seem to have the name Wriothesley is now not just split up for no apparent reason. It seems to be connecting the phallic symbol of Vere's line with the 4T cross about Vere's paternity lie. It seems to be binding the two together, or is at least connected in some way to both. Now, his name, as we remember, was Henry Wriothesley, so can we find Henry? There's HW, his initials, on either side of Vere's line, and the WR penetrating, as it were, into the Vere's line. Interesting. Where's the rest of his name? Henry, remember? Well, it's here. Henry, just like with Wriothesley, exactly the same thing. The name has been divided into two parts, and one part goes into the paternity lie, and another part is crossing over Vere's line. So both with the Christian name and with the surname, there seems to be connected to these two symbols and these two messages. But everything has to happen in threes, or it doesn't count. It's not valid. So we need a third way in which Henry Wriothesley can bind these two messages. Now notice how the re of Henry spurs off in a diagonal line upwards to the right, just above the H of Henry. If you look just above the W of Wriothesley, you see another word spurring off diagonally to the right. There it is. Ipse. Ipse in Latin means himself. Henry Wriothesley himself. Now, why on earth would the encryptor bother to go to all the trouble to put himself there? It doesn't seem to be adding anything particularly to the message. And I would think adds enormously to the burden and difficulty of making an encryption. But he's done it, so we have to ask why he's done it. I think the answer is that he wants the whole of this encryption to run from column 6 all the way to column 18, so that we learn that Henry Wriothesley himself is the only begetter. You see how that title runs from column 6 to 18. So the only begetter is Henry Wriothesley himself. The only begetter of what? Of whom? Well, as you can see, we're all getting very suspicious that he's the only begetter of Henry Vere. Can we find Henry Vere here? Well, if Henry Vere is indeed the son of Henry Wriothesley, he's called after him, so he shares the same Henry. So there we'll leave that Henry there, and now assume that it accounts for Henry Vere. And once again, we see that it is cast partly onto the paternity lie symbol and partly on Vere's line. And can we find Vere? Well, there's your HV, and yes, there is Henry Vere. He's sitting right there. And so now we can be absolutely sure that Vere's line didn't mean Edward de Vere's line, this phallic symbol I keep talking about. It's referring to Henry Vere's line, and suggesting that Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, is the only begetter of Henry Vere's line. The only begetter, therefore, one would think of Henry Vere. Now, we saw how the surname Wriothesley binds Vere's line and the paternity line symbol. Can we do the same with the surname Vere? Look how Henry Vere's surname is spaced out there. You've got it's a triangle. On the bottom line you have VRE with an E situated above it. Exactly and precisely replicated just there. VRE on the bottom with E above it. The clever way of showing that the surname and the Christian name of Henry Vere, just like with Henry Wriothesley, are binding together the paternity lie and Vere's line. If we take that last E of Vere and spur off again up to the right, we have ipse. We used it once before. We're going to use it again. In fact, we're going to use it 3 times. Everything happens in threes. The justification for using it for Henry Vere, you can see that it comes off the last E of Vere there, and it goes up to the E in column 18. And of course he was the 18th Earl, and his label sits right next to it, ensuing son. So the only begetter, Henry Wriothesley himself, is the only begetter of the ensuing son, the son that came out of all these sonnets and persuading him to have a baby for love of me, the ensuing son being Henry Vere himself. Okay, everything has to come in threes. We know this so well now, I will never tire of saying it. So this should be a third symbol, and if there's going to be a third symbol, we can tell exactly where it's going to be, because there's a great deal of space there to the right between columns 15 and 19 with nothing in it. Okay, so we've had messages about Henry Vere and Henry Wriothesley. Where's our great friend the poet? Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford. You will notice that 17 is the central column there. And you'll have known from my previous presentation that Oxford is consistently referred to by the numbers 17 and 40. We saw 1740 encoded on the Stratford Monument. We saw 1740 on the Westminster Monument. We saw 1740 occurring on the Sonnets dedication page. And also we found it in the first folio. So 1740 is the Earl of Oxford. So what happens if we form a cross, or a little T, an upside down T, from column 17 and row 4. That would be a 1740, would it not? So there's 1740, and that gives us one reason to suppose that is a symbol of Edward de Vere, but we're not going to get away with this unless we can find 3 reasons for supposing it to be a symbol of Edward de Vere. We used ipse twice, everything has to happen 3 times, so let's use ipse again. And yes, you'll notice ipse runs between E and O. That's the initials Edward Oxenford, as he signed himself, and also as some of his poems were published under the initials EO. So we've got 2 good reasons. We see that line ipse running straight across that 4T cross, 1740 cross. So that's our second reason why we can be sure we're talking about Edward de Vere there. But yes, we need a third reason, and I stared at this for quite a long time until I saw it, and it's actually obvious when you see it. It's staring one in the face. That T is an upside down T. It's slightly longer at the top than at the bottom, so it's an upside down cross. It is therefore the 4th cross, the cross of St. Peter, it's Petrine cross, and it is therefore the 4th T. And you remember the message, these sonnets all by ever the 4th T. We've been told he's the 4th T 3 times in the encryption, so this is confirmation that that emblem is Edward de Vere. It's the 4th T, 1740 cross, and it is marked by the initials EO himself, Edward Oxenford himself. So now we're very, very confident we've found the man, so what is the message hidden inside it? And the only way to ascertain it is you've got to find something that is relevant, has to be relevant. Totally pointless if we find a message that has nothing to do with Vere's paternity lie or Vere's line. Just before I show you that, you'll remember that I showed that Henry Wriothesley himself, the only begetter, covers in 3 ways those 3 symbols. The ensuing son, Henry Vere, ditto 3 ways those 3 symbols. Now we're on the last one, Edward de Vere. You see the EO covers the 2 symbols. How do we have Vere on the first one, the big paternity lie? Well, you remember he is the 4th T, and we had the 4th T down there right at the beginning with de Vere. That's the de Vere of Edward de Vere, the 4th T. So he's doing exactly the same thing, covering all 3 of these points. Okay, let's read what is said inside that upside down cross at the end. Has to be relevant to the question, and yes, it's a very relevant indeed. It's an anagram sine prole M. That might mean nothing to some people, but anyone who has made a study of genealogy will know exactly what it means, because it is extremely well known, famous phrase, usually abbreviated to SPM, which stands for sine prole mascula, without male issue, without male descendants, legitimate descendants. So there we have the answer. We heed Vere's paternity lie. The lie is quite clearly and quite obviously now the fact that Henry Vere shouldn't have been called Henry Vere, and he certainly shouldn't have been inheriting the titles of Oxford, because he was begotten by the only begetter himself, Henry Wriothesley, and he was the son that ensued after this great act of persuading, honey-tongued persuasion, to have a son for love of me. So that is the 3rd and final encryption, and it shows you basically the theme of the first 18 sonnets and shows you where the sonnets are heading and the starting point of them, and makes sense of them, and that's why it is encoded into the sonnet's dedication. Okay, last point I'd like to make, I'll just take you back to that Westminster Abbey I showed you on the very first encryption I showed you. Look inside the cloister there, and what do you see? The letter D, and that's the first of the 3 things that tell you where he's buried. If you look at the first of the symbols in the encryption I've just shown you, the 3rd encryption, yep, just there you have the word D written across it. This, of course, is the middle encryption I showed you, the second of the 3. There's only one person who's known to, if you like, sign his name or represent himself by a big triangle, which is the delta in Greek, i.e. the letter D in Greek. And yes, he is, of course, John Dee, Elizabeth's conjurer, whose hand we can see clearly in all 3 of these encryptions. That's all. Thank you.